Well, good evening, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome you this evening. And I'll start by welcoming you, Francesca and Markus. Hardly ever do we have the opportunity to hear firsthand in such a intimate and close scenario as this one from you. Also at a place that, as we just heard, you've actively shaped and continue to shape. And I also want to thank every single person in the audience because you've granted us the generosity of your time. Time is something we're going to talk a lot about today. And thank you. That one's for you. And I think many of us here in this room are moved by curiosity, by value systems and advocacy, and I'm sure some of us also want to have cues and hints as to how we can tell stories similar to yours in 20, 30 years or next week. So I want to make the confession that many of us came here to look for a few inspiration, tips, as well as a few ideas how to navigate reality, and we'll unpack reality in a bit. This conversation falls within a beautiful cycle that we have here in Madrid, thanks to the Thyssen-Bornemisza National Museum, and through the incredible work of Lucía, Ybarra, and Rosina Gómez Baeza, who've done an incredible advocacy for collecting practices and for collecting not only this year, but throughout the years. Many world-renowned collectors, active patrons and instigators of the arts have passed through these doors and sat at this very hall and engaged in conversations. And the one thing that they have in common is not only that you've cared for them in the invitation, so thank you, but also that they've left this room astounded with anecdotes, with passion, and with heart. And I have no doubt that today that's the same conversation that we're about to witness.
I hope so.
I want to, it's a bit of a tradition now, but I think before we hear from other people and before we acknowledge their histories and let them inspire us, I think it's important to acknowledge our neighbors, because how will we change the world that we're going to talk about if we don't know who's sitting next to us today? So if you're happy and comfortable to break the ice to whoever you have on your left and right, this is a good time to tell them, hi, hello, good evening. Because a lot of the conversation we're going to have today is about building what I would call, and what many before me have called, a social sculpture. Francesca and Markus, you, in your case, Francesca, founder of TBA 21, which is one of the few institutions in the world whose name bears the reference to the 21st century. In the same way that, Markus, you've been graced with the task to co-lead with Rosa Ferrer the direction and the vision for that institution. And I'm always so curious about when we send a message through the arts and when we collect, we're actually gathering many worlds. And the first humble question I wanted to ask each of you today, and you can take it from any angle that you want, is which worlds do you think you're connected to that we should learn about?
I think from my point of view, it was a world of balance, of trying to create a balance in my own life between the things I really care about and what I can do about it, and not end up in a frustration or a sense of guilt that I wasn't, being able to reach out to, those I cared about in a way that I felt that using the language that I really I had understood since I was like this small, right? I mean, dragged around the Thyssen Museum and in Villa Farita by my father when I was a really small child, and being given that sense of awe and appreciation, although I didn't have the intellectual understanding or anything. But as a child, you watch people and you watch the friends of your parents sort of be in kind of reverence and admiration for something. You go, oh wow, this must be cool, this must be important, or it must be valuable, or you make those associations because you watch other people's behavior, and as you grow up, you want to be part of that. You want to be part of that effort to put together in your own mind, in your own heart, the things you want to change about the world around you and the things you can do using the language of art that I understood. And, I went through rejection, I went through punk rock, as some of you may know, and I went through, a whole existence in London in the 80s where everybody was redefining themselves. And that was really important for me because punk, and it was kind of a sort of anarchy movement, but it was also followed by the New Romantics, where we were really into redefining fashion, culture, design. It was, and clubbing, of course, was a major thing in the whole thing, but, just the idea that I went through this period of being able to try and define who I was. That was really important because it sort of helped me not be squished into this formation that, might have, if I'd been a really good girl all my life, which I definitely wasn't. So, I just think that being able to build up my own personality and the community that I serve, and being confident enough that I could find a language to do that through.
Wow.
Nice, very nice. I would say, and it's funny that we just had these two slides, watery worlds. That's what I would say. What I'm connected to, and somehow always have been. I grew up from a very young age as a swimmer. I spent a lot of time in my puberty in swimming pools, hours and hours and hours every day. And that at some point stopped, obviously, and then I came through the theater to the contemporary art world, and then when started working with TBA 21 and starting TBA 21 Academy, which is this research program that we started in 2011 that really was dedicated for a long, long time exclusively to the ocean. These worlds somehow reconnected, no? And there, I think what was really important there was the ability to travel to different oceanic people, visit different oceanic people, and start learning from them completely different perspectives, because they think from the ocean. They think from movement, they think from sound, they think from rhythms, they think from change, and are very comfortable in this unstable place, right? Where we constantly seem to look for stability, for fixity, for the straight line, for the goal, and to learn from people that are comfortable with this back and forth, this movement, this meandering, this not looking for the straight line. That was really fantastic.
Thank you, Markus. And I think that ties in beautifully with how, Francesca, you've highlighted, a time and an epoch in London at a very specific cultural shift. And it seems to me, Markus, that the shift you're talking about is how your relationship with literally bodies of water as a very young person then becomes a greater mission. I was very excited. I was reading an article that came out in La Vanguardia about your work, and a part of it said that Markus works between Madrid, between Venice, and also has the largest office on planet Earth, which is the ocean. So I am humbled to be a few meters away from the gentleman with the largest office on Earth, and the visionary that engages with that office and that set it up. But Markus, I wanted to reflecting a bit on the wider mission of TBA 21 as a platform that both collects commissions and then acquires many of those commissions, and also as a platform that has, as you said, an academy dedicated to thinking about the ocean, among many other things, like the program Organiza, also with a very thorough publication arm. One thing that puzzles me about human beings like you, who instigate and who start conversations, is how do you keep your collecting practices and your storytelling practices intentional when your audience is unbeknownst to you, when you might think who is the public and the audience for the work, but there is that child that is in awe holding his father's hand in the same way that is a community in an island in the Pacific that never perhaps we imagined we could have a cultural and institutional dialogue with in this day and age. How do we engage with the unknown in these types of projects?
Well, it's only partially unknown, no? Because we do know a lot of the audiences and the communities that we work for, no? That we're in service of. I think a great privilege of developing and leading the Academy for a long time was actually that the first 9 years, the main content provider was a boat. And we would travel with that boat, and we would invite artists and scientists and environmentalists and legal experts. And later on, when we were spending more and more time in Oceania and in the Pacific, more and more indigenous colleagues and indigenous leaders. And we would go to these places. And you understand that once you've gone, there is a responsibility. This responsibility is expectation. Because many of these islands receive visitors, not a massive amount of visitors, but because there are so few visitors and you get welcomed so warmly, you get embraced in such a warm, authentic way, you know, people are, I would say they want to make commitments, right? They're so overwhelmed with joy and awe and inspiration that I come back, I do this, and we can do, and it very seldomly happens, right? And you understand that there is on the one hand, there's someone new, fantastic, let's welcome them. On the other hand, they're telling me again that they're coming back and that we're going to do this and that and the other. And you understand that there's a responsibility, and we've taken this responsibility very seriously. So we've gone back and back and back. So we've visited communities in Papua New Guinea 5 times. We went to, the different islands in the Marquesas in French Polynesia, the Marquesas, the societies, the Tuamotus, many islands, many times over. We would send artists back there to engage with these communities, the same as in the Caribbean, especially Jamaica, where we're very engaged through also a sister foundation, which is the Alligator Head Foundation, where we have an artist in residence program. I think here is the same thing, it's Absolutely. Like through Organismo, through the openings, through the public program, we start to get to know the people, right? Mm-hmm. The same is true for Venice, right? And so it is only partially unknown, and so the general public, I don't know, but that is the general. But you are this community, no? And so we do know.
I think I just want to add about that, because we had a conversation last night with John and Julian Knox, and all about what is community and how do you build community, and I think that's through loyalty and building trust. And your community doesn't have to be that big. It's about starting believing that you can transform something with a small group of people. And then that can grow. Most people think about, I got to get a big audience number, and I need to, we got to change the numbers here. And I think that you always aim so big. It's like you want to have an event. How many people came to your event, Right. And it's sort of super event driven, and that's not how you build community. And in particular in Venice, we were one of the first institutions not to charge an entrance fee. Oh, that's Ocean Space in Venice. So that's free to the public, number one. Secondly, it's been voted 3 years in a row as like the most preferred cultural space by the Venetians. Now, the Venetians are not an easy bunch, right? So, they're very much aware of the fact that everybody kind of floats in and out or flies in and out with their jets and goes rushing to the Biennale and all those side events. And literally, we had the most appalling behavior of people like, I can want to get in, when we had the John Jonas performance. And it was like, I got to be in there, I got to get in there. And people start getting really violent, actually. And this is kind of like a community, that's not community building. And so I think that also taking your time, returning, going back, engaging with the same people might seem, not ambitious enough, but it is really important. And that's one of the goals that we set ourselves when we first came to the Thyssen Museum here in Madrid, is that what's the community around the Thyssen Museum, and how can we participate in really building that up? And that means dealing with people of Madrid and that civic society here, and providing them with a program that they can rely on, that they can come back to. They're going to see the same people there. That's community building. It doesn't mean that the visitors that come in and out, they stream through the doors, but this is really an important role that I think institutions like ours, whether it's a really independent space like the one where we had John Jonas in that's a funny photo because it doesn't show the videos.
Yeah,
it's like
it's
these
from the backside.
Each one of those boxes have got amazing films in them. But just that idea that you sort of go for the return visitor.
Right.
And you go for, and they were very, John was talking about how difficult in the 80s, which was kind of like my zone in my time in London. And he was going how hard it was for a colored black artist to be seen and to work in London in the 80s. And I was sort of like cringing a bit because we were so frivolous and, a bon vivant in many ways. And to imagine that the practice that John has now, that we celebrate here at the museum yesterday, those were the beginnings of it in very difficult times. And building a community around himself was how he survived, because you need to be able to do the work that you do even when there's no one paying attention to it. And I think that's what gives you the leap into being innovators. Because one of the things that people say about TBA 21 is that we pioneered this and we pioneered, we've been talking about the oceans for a very long time, and engaging with the ocean and learning from the ocean, and really bringing people together with the ocean, and creating an ocean space, and working with great artists, commissioning them to think. There's another one. She's an amazing artist called Taloy Havini, who made this incredible sound piece. This is the map of her island. It's part of a small group of islands off Papua New Guinea called Bougainville. And, she's living and working in Australia, but, also an indigenous voice. And actually the sound piece reflects the chants and songs of her fathers. And that was a beautiful thing about the front. Sorry, I'm jumping around. I'm going to do a Caroline Christoph Bagagev on you all. It's like, but that reminds me of the performance that we had with Julian, where he got up on stage and he said, I got a phone call from an elder. He was referring to John Ackenfrau. And I think there's this incredible internal relationship where we forget about who our elders were, and what we've learned and what we should learn and could learn from them, rather than, so it was a beautiful thing about, she's taken that piece and created something really contemporary and immersive from the voices of her elders, from the Bougainville Islands. It's really an incredible. So speak a little bit more about that one, because it's
well,
right
this was,
there.
this was super special because it was during COVID. And Taloy had never worked at such scale. No, this is the thing about the space in Venice. It's supposedly the largest single volume in Venice. No, it has 26-meter high ceilings and it has 30+ ceiling span. So it's like, it's really enormous, and what you see is just one side of the space. No, it's one of 5 churches in all of Italy that has a double-sided altar running through the middle. So the space also resonates across. And Taloy had never been to the space. She had seen models of it. She had seen images of it. We had made, the way the track of the sun for her, all of it. But she made a sound piece. So and because it's such a huge volume, the reverberation is extremely long. So to install a sound piece in a space that has such specific qualities in terms of sound was extremely difficult. We were able, although it was COVID, and although the lockdown especially in Australia, was super, super, super harsh. You couldn't travel between provinces. I mean, you couldn't leave your house, but you couldn't travel between provinces and all of that. And somehow we managed for her to go onto an expedition that was mapping the Coral Sea. They were doing a mapping exercise, and they were doing a mapping exercise through sound. And so she realized that actually her communities have been doing the same thing for millennia. They've been mapping their existence through sound. These sounds were different. They were chants, no? There were chants, and there were different songs and so on. And so she combined these 2 efforts of mapping time and mapping space in this beautiful, beautiful sound installation. And then she found herself a space in Sydney that had similar dimensions, and she rehearsed it there, and then she brought it there. And the island, as you said, it's the island of Buka, it's her home. And because she couldn't come to Ocean Space, what she wanted to do was she wanted to send us her home. And so she made this seating arrangement that was the shape of her island for us to rest on. And she was incredibly generous with that space, because then she opened it up for a public program. People could use it as stage, as resting place, and so on. And because the space is free, and because it's in a kind of neighborhood where people actually live, you had kids running in and out, jumping off the island. It was really life, no? And that's so beautiful when art all of a sudden merges with life, and it's not this kind of fetishized, very, very, very precious thing, but it's actually, people spend 6 months of their lives with it, because they grew up there, which is really beautiful.
I really rescue how you talk about in your sharing. You talk about care, and you talk about responsibility with such importance, in the same way that you, as we've just heard, make so apparent the proximity that you have with artists. These are people that you actually know.
Yeah.
This is not someone whose name you've read about on an email or a catalog that you sign off. These are people that you're meeting, that you're actively engaging in conversation. Just as we talked yesterday with John Akamfra here in this exact room. And one thing that I'm always curious about, and what I find particularly special about the TVA 21 collection specifically, as a larger platform, is, and to go back to a lot of the language that you've developed and built for it, Francesca, this notion of collecting not as possessing, but collecting as a form of stewardship, as a form of taking care and advocating for. And in that process of taking care and advocating, one of the biggest lessons you've taught me over the past few years is the importance of giving artists time. Instead of asking them to reproduce the exact pace and machinery of output and rush that the same world that we're trying to change is actually engaging with, and the same pace of development that is actually the source of many of our ills. And I'm curious about what goes into these conversations. I mean, incredible names come to mind, such as Stephanie Comilang, Tabitha Rezer. My first time ever meeting someone from French Guiana happened in this museum in a TBA 21 exhibition, because you worked with Tabitha on a first name basis in collaboration with Fondation Louis Vuitton. But I'm just curious about, what goes into inviting an artist and telling them, I want you in the room. What are values that emerge? What are curiosities that you're constantly thinking about that allow you to actually nurture those relationships?
I think that's the best question you could ask me. Yeah, because, you know, we are so, all of us, into multitasking. I'm looking at like I'd say about 10% of the audience in here are on their phones. I'm not taking it personally, but it's just that we do that. And we have this ability to multitask. But at the same time, an artist is a different creature, you know? And they're multitasking in a completely different way. And what we want and ask from them is to transport themselves through the many different disciplines that actually address any issue. Like, people talk about climate change, but they don't, it's like, that's 2 words, okay, but, you know, that's an interrelationship between our atmosphere, our oceans, our pollution, I mean, the anthropocenic spike. You can look at geology, you look at social behavior, you look at chemistry, you look at ocean science. You cannot talk about climate change without addressing so many different things. We're all educated in these kind of like different, you know, so we've got all these different apps on our phone that can do all these different functions, but we don't, now we have AI maybe that can sort of glue it all together. But it's so important to give an artist that time, mainly because they cannot absorb all of these different, they need to invest time. And we, you know, we call it artistic research. And that's what we've really become synonymous with supporting, because whilst we get a lot of calls and go, hey, we've had a great ocean idea. It's like, fantastic. Wish you luck with it, you know? Because it doesn't mean that everything that's ocean needs to come our way, because usually people have come up with something really two-dimensional about the ocean. And because they're hitting a topic that they think we're excited about, the ocean is the most complex entity. It represents 70% of Earth and of our, you know, there's 90% of all species on Earth actually, because this is such a massive volume and we're only just beginning to discover its depths and all of the life forces down there. But this incredible complex system, you cannot spend just 6 months or a year just looking at. So, for instance, with Link, I mean, there's some artists that are really good at dragging this out and go, well, I need another 100,000 because I need to go and do this and that and research more, and we're already so hooked on this project by then. But, you know, it's just incredible complexity, and I think we miss that opportunity by doing all the things that we do in such a hurry. We miss the complexity, and that's the incredible. And when John was talking about, because he was being asked last night about, you know, how does he edit all of those vintage films that he uses, and then what does he actually choose to film, and what sort of landscapes does he want, and, you know, and this editing process, when you go and see the work downstairs or next door, it's incredibly complex. And he's suddenly, you know, why is he looking at Vietnam again, and you know, what are the choices that people make to tell that story, and to do it with leaving that incredible, what we were talking about, the space in between, where if something's presented to you in a way that it's all there, where do you have the space to enter? Right? Where do you have that moment where you can go, oh, wait a minute, you know, and then you start making up your own, you know, there has to be that space, otherwise you're not going to enter. It's not about not having the time or the incentive to, I often say to people, like, spend a bit of time with this. Not only because we've spent a lot of time producing it, but just give it a bit of time. And that's where I think artists who are really magical, you know, manage to create that balance between giving you lots of information from many different areas and different sources and different, you know, different knowledge systems, let's call it different knowledge systems, not disciplines, from indigenous to the most scientific and the most advanced scientists. And I think that's something that we need to learn to transverse with greater ease. And that's the magic. And that's why I think time is of the essence, in the sense of leaving it, giving them time to be able to develop that. Because you can also produce something, like maybe I'm over answering this question too. But, I just think that's the magic in giving people also, you started doing it with convenings, where you brought also different people together that were looking at the same subject. We used to do it with Daniela in Lockwood. We used to bring, like very often we'd plan an exhibition, let's say an Ernesto Neto exhibition. But then we'd invite 3 or 4 people to write for the catalogue. But they would have not even met Ernesto. They might have phoned him. But, we created these convenings where the authors of the catalogue, plus other people researching indigenous cultures, plus, somebody dealing with hallucinogenics, plus somebody, So all of that universe of Ernesto, we were able to explore, and we questioned regularly our own practice. And that sometimes people just don't have the time to do. But how often do you get to sit back with some of the most brilliant people on an island where there are no cars and just feast together, drink wine together, and then have, rigorous sort of talking sessions where we would workshop things. And I think that was the beginning of my understanding of what makes interdisciplinarity work. It's not by throwing an artist together with a scientist and a filmmaker in a room and just shaking up it like a cocktail and saying, oh, let's hope this is a great martini, Because that's not how it works. And so if you really, really want to develop interdisciplinary projects, I think the secret ingredient is time and patience.
The secret ingredient is time and patience. Maybe Markus and we're
Rushing.
wrestling.
We're trying to catch up time. Yeah.
We're good. But one thing that I always think about in relationship to your work with the collection has to do with something that can't quite escape my mind, which I read a few months ago, which is that we sit at a time in which we're about to witness the largest, hear me out, intergenerational wealth and knowledge transfer in history. Never in the world has there been so much wealth, and never in the world has there been so much knowledge. At the same time, we sit in the year in which the word polycrisis has completely flooded the cultural scene and many other scenes, from media to politics to our everyday lives. And we also sit at a time in which corals faced its largest degradation ever.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'm always curious about when it comes to collectors like the two of you, which thank you again, have put their heart, souls, and plenty of time into building these collections and platforms. One thing that I'm always curious about is why not stop at beauty? Why actually go, Francesca, deeper, multidisciplinarily? Why invest? And I guess that's the question, and I'm very excited to hear your answer, Markus. Why invest in complexity when we could stop at the things that are pretty and interesting?
Well, pretty is completely subjective, as I've discovered with most of my family.
Yeah, but don't underestimate beauty. No, I think this is something that we should also allow ourselves, right? But it's like everything needs to have purpose and meaning and depth and this and that and the other. I think we can also every now and again just allow beauty and really be moved by it and overwhelmed by it and just dwell in it. No, I think that's the one thing. The question is, how do we see beauty and complexity and not just a mess, right? That's I think that's somehow the question. And I think it's probably the DNA is obviously installed by Francesca and Daniela, who've been building TBA 21 for a long time. But to really understand that artists have the possibility not to do the obvious thing, to make the unseen seen and bring things into the public sphere where we can look at them in different ways, where it's not just the poly crisis and it's not just catastrophic, but you have this kind of kaleidoscopic view on things, but also where you understand that beauty, creation, multidisciplinarity, that has agency, right? And with all of these challenges that you've just described and many others, there is then also the question, how do we as individuals and as organizations, which is just a group of individuals that come together and come work at the same time in the same place and on similar projects, right? But how do we want to be in the world, right? And I think it is, we're in a difficult situation, because there's this thing that is becoming more and more present also in the art world, is to imagine the future differently.
Right.
Fantastic. But the now is still happening.
Right.
The now is still happening, and whilst we're sitting and imagining, the now that we don't want is still continuing and going. Right? So it's on the one hand imagining, on the other hand doing differently, to actually actively to make being a practice, and the invocation of the future that we actually want is a project that we're working on, and that we're not just sitting and imagining.
I really rescue when you talk about this, the importance of presence, because in thinking about your collecting practices, I react to the fact that you're not staying in the daydreaming theory or these new binaries that we have of futurism and nostalgia, right? But what you're actually doing, and I have a very tangible example, which was my very first visit to this museum, to this house, when I was very young. And I was a young curator and also collecting in Dubai. And I remember coming here, and out of all the grandioseness that surrounded me, I saw a little pink label that said Encuentros.
Yes, what?
Encuentros, encounters. And I said, hold on, who's intervening this national museum? And it was your collection. It was your collection because there was a brave and bold move to say, we, in the time that we've dedicated, in the way we've engaged with beauty and its complexity, we want to present this collection in conversation with the greater national institution. We want to dynamize a dialogue that otherwise wouldn't happen if we don't engage as agents. And I was also happy to see that was preceded by Abundant Features, which was a beautiful project that you did also in Córdoba. And all of this meditation about how that little pink sign had an impact on me makes me think about the many gestures that occur when we collect, and the many gestures that take place when we are cultural instigators. There are many gestures you've engaged with, but one that I would really perhaps want to hone deeper into is the beginning of the collection. Because, recently we've seen it in great exhibitions like the Rafilia. We've seen the collection, as I said, in different intervention projects. But there is a starting point, Francesca, which we'll see eventually in one of these images.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, first of all, beauty. This is, Teresa Solar was a work that we helped her produce for the Venice Biennale.
Yes.
And she did these works, and this sort of completely changed her trajectory as an
Absolutely,
artist.
yes.
But this is quite beautiful too, by the way. So we don't turn her back on beauty.
We don't know, and
But also beauty is part of the process. And just to go back to that a little bit, because when I was thinking, there's an image earlier on of Dineo Bopape's installation, which was such a beautiful film, where she went to Jamaica and being coming from she's from South Africa, very aware of the slave movement that went obviously to Jamaica, and she was giving honor and throwing gifts into the sea to sort of respect the memory of those that were lost at sea and in slavery. And a hugely powerful message in that, but done in beauty and grace and poetry. And I think that very often when you deal with some of the most difficult topics and the most harsh realities that we have and things that are completely overwhelming, that not the use of beauty, but the incorporation of beauty and poetry into something that gives it also that possibility that you look at hope. You know, we have to keep up hope. That was the message from John yesterday. Never stop hoping that we can make change. I've seen it. Okay, I want it. Okay, the beginning of the collection.
What are we looking at?
So what happened, the beginning of the collection, I went to PS1 in New York and to see an exhibition called by Janet Cardiff. Amazing Canadian sound artist mainly. And there was this piece, and then there was this other work that many of you will know called 40-part motet, which is 40 speakers in an oval shape, each one representing the voice of one singer in a choir. And when you stand in the middle of the room, you hear this incredible, beautiful canonic choir piece from a beautiful church upstate New York. But then when you walk around, you hear the voice of each person, and you're reminded of each individual single voice. This is a different piece. When you touch the table, you hear voices around the room of, this was her original kitchen table that she grew up with when she was in Canada in her family home. And she found it in the basement. They'd practically thrown it away. And she just started revisiting these haunting conversations of different, people and family friends as she was growing up, listening to these conversations that maybe she didn't understand or she did. And some of them are quite brutal. And, we speak the truth around the kitchen table generally. And so this, I was like, I got to have this, the big one, the 40-part motet. And it took me about a year to figure out what gallery was and how to get in touch with which gallery. And I remember ringing Simon de Paris and said, I don't know, I've just seen this work by Janet Cardiff. He said, call Lauren Augustine. So I get this really kind of very tough American New York dealer. And I thought, I'll go to one in Berlin, who's a bit easier going. And she just looked at me straight in the eyes, and I was like, I'm Thyssen-Bornemisza, right? And she was like, yeah, but we don't sell to collectors. Janet's work only goes to institutions. You have to be in and I was like, well, we have a museum. But I was like, we don't really, no, it wasn't quite, this is like 2001, right? So I had this I had to take a step back and go, okay, that didn't work. And so I went back to Vienna with my tail between my legs, went straight to a lawyer, and I said, I need to have a foundation. How do I get a foundation? He said, it's really easy in Austria. You just get a few bylaws and you do, right? So off we went. And about 3 weeks later, I went back to Berlin and I went, I have an institution. And I'm not kidding. I know it's a funny story, but this is how it really happened. And so they were like, okay, and what about an exhibition? I was like, an exhibition? Yeah, you wanted to see 40-part motet, and this is probably the most complex artwork you could probably ever install, and then to touch, and so Daniela and I went off to the Academy of Fine Arts, and we was like, could we borrow some space? And I had a little office that I sort of rented in the city of Vienna. And basically, the challenge it's like, you got to live up to what your promise is. And so we delivered this incredible show, and Janet came over from Canada, and it was just phenomenal because we got to experience 40-part motet, which was on loan and not for sale, and I managed to buy the To Touch, which is this table which I hope one day we'll be able to show here in the museum. And this was, I immediately, the responsibility that you suddenly have on your shoulders, other people's artworks that they've invested so much in, you are just a caretaker of. it's not a prestige thing. It never was for me. And at that time, there were a lot of people talking about the investment in arts. And since we were a new foundation, what are you investing? How are you investing? And there was all these kind of funds cooking up, and they all failed, and everybody lost their shirts. But good for them. And we really went, oh my God, this is where the art world is going. And it has gone that way.
Yeah.
And you now see this kind of system failing, and galleries closing, and I feel it's really tragic, because these are people that have invested a lot. But it shows you that there are bubbles, and that one should never look at art as an investment. It's like buying a boat. It's just throwing, you're going to look after that work for the rest of your life. You're going to care for it. You're going to store it. And then the challenge is, how do you bring it back into the public domain? Because that was the promise you made the artist when they gave you this exceptional work, right? And that's where you find yourself. That was why Cordoba was so important, that we were able to bring some of these works to Spain and show them in an architecture and in a space that allowed for these kind of massive installations by Carsten Höller, that, I just don't know why I invested in artworks this size. This is this is extraordinary piece by Olafur Eliasson called Your Black Horizon, which I saw in Reykjavik in Iceland in 2002 when I went to see his exhibition there. And Olafur and I became friends a long time ago, and that was for me a challenge, because when I saw it in Reykjavik, there were 4 columns in the middle of the room and 2 doors, one in and out, like in a museum. And it cut the line of the horizon. And I challenged, at the time, a young architect, before he got into trouble, called David A.J., to create the architecture for that piece so that it would be this uninterrupted line. And that's when I started, looking at architecture, looking at different, and then we worked a lot with sound. Just to say that then you sort of start getting immersed in problem solving, and giving artists the time to reflect on what's the best possible way you could show a work. And I think, going back to that, the installation of John Akumfra, everybody's like,
please go see it.
Better than in Venice. Because it was the British Pavilion in Venice last year, and everybody's going like, it's better than in Venice. But it's like, because you care that much, and that's one of the things, many artists sort of feel like they've been a bit spoiled because we've managed to make their work really sing. And that is important, is the production side, the research side, the getting the commission together. But then the next part is, how do you bring it to the public? How do you engage with it? How do you bring it alive? How do you create a public program that really brings it alive and brings people to sort of think about what are the subjects that John is talking about? So, Janet Cardiff. I still didn't get my 40-part motet. It still was unavailable. And then I get this call from Caroline Christoph Bargagiev, who's a phenomenal curator, who was many years the director of the Castello Rivoli. And she's doing the Sydney Biennale. This is like, 20 years ago. And she goes, Francesca, I heard you really like Janet Cardiff. Would you be interested in helping us with the production of this new work? It's the biggest piece that she's ever going to create, and it's huge, and it's 47 speakers, 99 this, and I was like, absolutely, count me in. It was like, without even a breath, without even Daniela, I was like, I think we've gotten ourselves into something bigger there. So this piece, I know many of you might have seen it at Matadero. When was it, Rosa? 2 years ago? 3 or 4. It was in the Matadero, we brought it here, and it just was amazing in the Matadero. But this was actually in the Armory in New York, which of course makes it look really massive, because the Armory, as you know, is the biggest exhibition space anywhere. And, these are the kind of, it's a folly, but at the same time, it's so relevant today because you hear in this piece, you hear Russian armies marching, you hear the call to battle, and we were thinking, obviously, in the last 3 years, what's been going on in Ukraine, and I mean, these are works that were produced déjà vu back then, right? And bringing in, and sometimes the relevance of them becomes even more powerful. 10, that's also really interesting about how some Kutlu Gattermann's work, and that was the first commission we ever did, dealing with an incredible traumatized Kurdish village and community trying to cling to their identity. And we worked for, 3 years on the whole Central Eastern European landscape. We're engaged with 7 East European countries as they were being absorbed into the EU in, what was it? I can't remember the year. That, these
12.
were huge.
No, 2006.
2006 and 2007, when, and Austria was trying desperately hard to sort of create an Euro project, and we were the only ones dealing with all the minorities and all those, and sticking our finger into they're the Romas and they're the Bulgarians and there's the Turks and there's there are minorities. The whole Central and Eastern European landscape is made of, is built on minorities and living together in communities. So these works were really like going into the core of it, but doing it with beauty.
With beauty.
And generosity.
Acupuncture with beauty.
And I think so.
I wanted to share with you a rather personal anecdote, and I know we're approaching the end, Francesca and Markus, but actually, just a bit over 4 years ago in Athens, I go to a renewed tobacco factory, and I see a work with all these screens and these couches and these stories in Turkish and Kurdish. And little did I know that I was interacting in the middle of a pandemic with a work that you had an active role in making happen. All of this to say that these stories of beginnings that you share have reached a form of tentacularity, to use an image of the ocean, that reaches far beyond our everyday comprehension, that when we engage in the processes of support, of investment of time, but also of endurance, again, it goes back to knowing or not knowing our audience. We're engaging with the magic of the transformation that an artwork like the ones we've seen here, we had Jonah Comfort 2017 Purple, that these artworks the magic that they will bring.
No, that was the boat that we went traveling around the Pacific, and this is a beautiful island in the Marquesas. And, we were able to really bring parts of this imagery that we had collected in that part of the Pacific. It was so beautiful. And John, sent his crew down to include some of that in the film. So beautiful.
And it goes without saying that everyone in this room and your friends and networks are super invited to see Jonah Comfort's solo exhibition, which is here at the Thyssen Museum, curated by Tarini Malik, which opened just hours ago. I wanted to close, also hoping we can make some room for questions, but one beautiful thing that kind of explains why we're here is because, after all, we are in Madrid, we are in Spain, a global hub of many things. And also, just a few years ago, about 6 years ago, TBA 21 and the wider vision that you had finds a new home here, finds a more public-facing home here. And in thinking a lot about the spirit of this program as well, part of the invitation of these cycles of collector talks is about new canons and new ways of interpreting contemporary art and both the living artists as well as their legacies. And I'm curious a bit from the place of your heart, perhaps. What forms of magic have you found in Madrid and in Spain? What has been new about this place, and how are we part of that story?
Welcoming.
Yeah.
I think we've been received here with such open arms. Obviously, there's a long-standing relationship through the museum and a relationship with the name, obviously, right? But the warmth and the enthusiasm that we had arrived was really incredible and immediately encouraging and reciprocal. No, it's like when you come somewhere and people are excited, you're excited, and then the people are more excited, and you get more excited, and you kind of get into this feedback loop of super excited.
Yeah.
I think
great gin tonics.
and great gin tonics and the best ice cubes on the planet, right? But I think there's one thing that Francesca didn't mention earlier about time. No, time is one thing, trust is another thing. No, and how do you build trust with each other so that you can actually experiment and do something together that is truly extraordinary? Not because you want to do something extraordinary, but because the space that you create allows you to do something that is out of the ordinary. It's extraordinary, right? And so I think time is one thing, trust is really the other thing, and there was so much trust paid forward to us by the museum to really make something happening here that they hadn't done before, that really extraordinary things were possible. Yeah, there we go.
That's
short and concise.
Short
now
and
you
precise. Now me to
now
waffle.
you go.
Now I send everybody to sleep, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I might just make a little plug for something that I started with Monica Caracchino, Catapulta. She's right there. And this is a lady with quite a reputation in Madrid, you know, just casa encendida, and has worked with young generation artists. And we got together, and you know, one of the things that Teresa Solar piece that I showed, I mean, she couldn't get any funding to help her to go to the Venice Biennale. And I jumped in with a friend of mine, and we helped her with the production. And then we got this wonderful piece, which I immediately donated to the Reina Sofia. And that gave me that what is needed in Madrid or in Spain is really a very, not only just the fact that artists could get money to do their productions, to go and do various projects, but what's missing is the international profile of artists living here in the international art scene, which is so vast, so huge, and there's so many, you know, biennales, whether they're in Shanghai or in Liverpool or in Lyon or in Marrakesh, or it's just insane the amount of São Paulo. Just the fact that we now have a program where mainly we invite these curators. The moment they get an email from Monica like, come to Madrid, we'll take care of you, and we'll show you around, we'll introduce you. What kind of artists are you looking for? And they're going like, whoa, okay, yeah, sure, I'll come to Madrid. I hear it's a great place to come, right? Yeah. So people are talking about Madrid, they want to come, but they don't have the invitation necessarily. And I think this is now we're introducing, we've just had a big curators trip last week, and we've had a number of, we've got now already a call from Toronto you've been looking after. So this is a great opportunity to open up, which is otherwise a rather inward-looking art scene, which just is going to explode, because ARCO is a great platform for young artists, especially in Spain. It's become better and better in terms of the quality of what's being presented, and you get to see a lot of what's going on in Central South America. But Spain, I think, remains still at this cusp of people's curiosity, and I'm really happy that, it's something I started in with a friend of mine in Vienna 10 years ago. And, at the last big Venice Biennale, there were 4 Austrian artists and no Spanish artists, just as an example. So, in Adrian's Biennale, and that's because we worked really hard on Adrian and inviting him to Vienna. So it is really important that these people that are part of the international cultural scene really come to Spain, and we take them to everywhere from Basque to the Canary Islands, wherever they want to go, wherever there are artists. We'll make sure that they visit, and that's, I think, something is just our way of giving back a little bit, because as Markus says, the welcome has been phenomenal. And I'm forever grateful for the museum here for making us feel so at home.
Thank you. Thank you for not only being part of that hospitality and feeling welcome, but also exercising it. And I do want to emphasize the importance, as you have just mentioned, of generating visitors programs tied to the collections and to contemporary art, and so that us who are decision makers, instigators, and also lovers of the arts engage in those viajes de ida y venida, those trips of coming and going, you know. In the spirit of closing, I do want to open up to the audience for perhaps one or two questions so that we can, you know, top off this conversation with a bit of that interaction. I've been extremely moved and involved and inspired by the messages that you shared with us today. And please know that that hospitality that you're extending has a deep impact and a massive ripple effect in those of us who are paying attention. So thank you. And I want to, we've got a question here. Yeah.
I would like to ask Francesca and Markus too, is there any feature or quality in a work of art which is most likely to move you, to get you? I mean, it's more likely that it could be the visual power of a work of art, or the narrative, or let's say, the content of the work of art, the commitment of the artist, or which influences you most when you decide to commission a work from an artist, or to purchase a work of art? I guess probably there is no rule, but which is most likely to get you? Are you
probably two different answers.
Yeah.
But
okay.
for me, it's if it triggers my curiosity. I'm an insatiable, curious person, being a Gemini. I don't know, how many Geminis in the room? Yeah, a few.
Well, they're all sitting in the front.
Not enough,
Four
obviously.
Geminis only?
You know, it's like we are insatiable, curious people. And I think that when it's something that that's what draws me in. And I mean, it happens to me walking around in the collection, which obviously I know intimately, and then suddenly I discover a portrait, and I'm drawn into that person's expression. I mean, some of these old masters upstairs, mind-boggling. You know, go back upstairs and have another look, and you'll find things you never even realized. And I want to know who that person was. And I look on the label, and there's hardly, because portraiture in that time, we've kind of lost who these portraits are of. And very often, a little historical knowledge is maybe known about them. I just become fascinated, like, who were they, what were they like, why were they dressed like this, did they, and that's, it's a curiosity. So if you look at any of these works, obviously they would drag me in, and the production and commissioning, the questions you would rise during these conversations, which, curiosity.
Markus.
As Francesca answered about commissioning, I'm going to answer about buying, which I, don't do a lot, but the question is, do I want to live with it? No? That's the question. Do I want to spend my life with this piece of work? Right? And so this can be many, many, many things. It can be the narrative, it can just be the composition, it can be, but I don't want to be bored of it in a couple of years, months, whatever. No, it's like it needs to really, really, really convince me that I want to look at it over and over and over and over and over again and spend time with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question from the audience. We have a hand up here, and the mic is traveling. Thank you so much. Yeah, and maybe if we can begin thinking of one third and final question, if there is any takers, we're happy to accommodate it, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just going to add a word, which is for me the word which is defining both of them, and which is very, very rare in the art world, is that they're both activists. They're real activists for me, because they're completely engaged with their society. They're engaged, Francesca, what she did with, naming refugees, or what you did with heritage in the past and things like this, and both of you now with ocean. You're completely into your time and mixing not only art just to look at it, but how it interferes with our society and our day-to-day life. And for this, I want to thank you, because I think you're the only one that I know really so active.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really kind.
Thanks for bringing the word activism into the room and for helping us identify Francesca and Markus as such. I want to make room for one final question, if we have one from the audience, in the spirit of wrapping up. I know we're very inspired, all of us.
What's for dinner?
What's for dinner? That could be the final question.
Yeah.
Any
Thank
last
you,
thoughts?
Daniel, I really enjoyed your questions so much, and they helped us kind of get into. Because I remember I was sitting there watching John, and he hates having the spotlight on him. He's a very shy, modest person. And I was sitting there where Velia was sitting, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that's not me on stage. I'd completely forgotten that. And it's just having a great moderator that really sort of helps you think about what your intentions are. Because I think that's, is where do you liberate yourself from feeling guilty or shame or just being inactive. And I would finish with a call for, that feeling complicit is really if you're not active. Even if you, like 2 nights ago we had this charity for UNRWA. This Palestinian organization that's been banned from helping, that was part of the scheme of the whole genocide that's going on in Gaza at the moment. And then there was Sudan, which, Médecins Sans Frontières, and this was John's request to have Julian Knox and his friend Thibault to perform. I don't know if any of you were there, but it was the most spellbinding performance I've ever seen in the museum. And this was a reminder of Sudan is not on our minds, not on our radars, And I just think that to care enough to want to do something. And that's the thing, as many of the issues today are so explosive, so vast, so huge, and and never lose hope that there can be change. And that means also you need to participate in that creation of change. And that's the wonderful thing about being in the arts, is that artists are really transformatory. They really give us something to think about and to explore our own reality and our own relationship with, post-colonial, the tragedies of war, the poisons of our system, of ecological collapse, of the importance and the value that we should be giving our oceans and not just exploitation. And that starts with our own behavior. And I think that's an amazing thing to be able to do, is to transform the world bit by bit. And there was this, I'll close with this, just a quite little thing that I asked to meet this woman from Médecins Sans Frontières who's been to Sudan, because I didn't know very much about the whole conflict other than what I read, on the news. And she's been there many, many, many times and started telling me what an incredibly beautiful country it was, and how she would go back at any moment she could. And she said, you know, when I know that I've helped just even one person, I feel better about myself. I know I can go to sleep that night. I've done something. And that's where it begins. And it's the same thing about creating community. Start small. None of us need to solve the problems of the world. It's not possible. I mean, even the people that we vote for can't do it. So how, you know, that's the disappointment. And when they fail, we feel we can't do anything. And I think that's the difference, is that we have to keep up the hope and make sure that we continue to care. And to do that through any means that are available to us. And for me, it's been the art world and the artists that I've worked with. And for you, it's the same. It's working with incredibly creative people that give constant hope. And I'm absolutely sure that we can change the world we live in, and we do not need to be in this poly-crisis. I'm glad I don't have to use that word too much anymore in the future. Thank you.
Is it off? Is it off? First of all, thank you all for spending the evening with us. Really, now it's on. Okay, now it's on.
Hey, shut us
It's
off.
on. Yeah.
I want to go home.
But I wanted to say one thing one word, to bring another word, which is courage. And I think that is important. When Jaslyn Kaur last year received the Turner Prize, she said, you know, you as institutions, you want us to be activists out there, and you want us to shut up in here. And so I just wanted to congratulate you as directors of this museum specifically for having the courage to actually allow this conversation that happened 2 days ago about Gaza and Sudan to happen, to allow this conversation between John and Torini to happen yesterday in a very open, completely uncensored way. And that takes courage, and this is what we need in these times, that we can have these conversations amongst friends in the public sphere, and we hope that someone gets inspired, like you described. You found this little label up there, and it meant something to you, that we have these conversations here in the public sphere that hopefully means something to someone that can do the same thing again in a different way. But it takes courage, and so thank you very much to this museum.